This video is brought to you by Nvidia and MSI's range of 30 series GPUs, including their brand new RTX 3090 Ti. Stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Ghostwire Tokyo has had an interesting and disruptive development. It comes from Tango Works, makers of the Evil Within series, and founded by Shinji Mikami, creator of the Resident Evil series. Mikami is an industry greybeard at this point, and has spoken on a number of occasions about how important it is to pass the torch to the next generation of game makers. Ikumi Nakamura of E3 fame was one such torchbearer, appointed to lead Ghostwire Tokyo since its inception. Sadly, she did leave the project before its completion, citing poor health, leading to Kenji Kimura to take over. Like most recent games, Ghostwire Tokyo was delayed multiple times due to COVID, and interestingly, it's a Bethesda game, which means that Microsoft own it, but it's a timed PS5 and PC exclusive. That's bad news for those of you with an Xbox, since you'll have to wait 12 months to play it, but the good news is that when it does arrive, it'll be on Game Pass. That's a little bit important, I think we'll come back to that later. Studio boss Mikami-san did an interview with Edge magazine during the pre-release press tour for the title, and in it he said something really interesting. To quote Edge, Mikami himself says that Ghostwire being judged familiar would be a bigger problem than having it perceived as an ill-advised gamble, end quote. To quote Mikami, "It'll make me happy if customers say, 'Really? Tango made that too?' At Tango, we want to be making original titles periodically. Getting attached to a specific creative identity or image would actually make that harder to do," end quote. I think this quote and this commitment to passing the torch is really important to highlight at the beginning of this review, because I think context and intention matters a lot when it comes to how we critique something. When Ubisoft make a giant, bloated, grindy mess of a game and then sell you an XP booster to get through it faster, I don't have any sympathy or affection for that game design. It just pisses me off. But here, Tango have gone well outside their traditional survival horror stomping grounds because they don't want to be typecast, and they deliberately handed the project to younger talent because they care about the future of not only their studio, but the industry. I respect that a lot, and it really takes the edge off a lot of my criticisms about this game because while I think there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work here, I always remember that Tango Works weren't trying to sell us some bullshit microtransaction-laden live service with NFTs thrown in for good measure. They were just trying to make an honest video game, and they were trying to do something different from the games they typically make. But just because this is a different type of game for Tango Works doesn't mean it's a different type of game for us. Recently, Yosuke Matsuda, president of Square Enix, said that Japanese studios shouldn't try to emulate Western games. Quote, "If Japanese imitate Western games, they will not be able to produce good ones," end quote. Matsuda wasn't speaking about any game in particular, and he certainly wasn't speaking specifically about Ghostwire Tokyo. However, I think Ghostwire proves he is largely correct because this game from this Japanese developer takes a setting, bestiary, soundtrack, and narrative that are wholly Japanese in both substance and style, and it combines all of that with the most bland, played out, and grating aspects of Western AAA open-world game design, and that's setting aside the remarkably poor combat. There are two games here. One of them is a fucking cool Tango Works game that you've never seen before. The other one is a really not great Ubisoft-style, map marker-driven, open-world game that you've played dozens of times before. I wish I could say that the good outweighs the bad here, but like The Matrix Reloaded, style can only get you so far, and when the credits roll, you're more likely to lament the game that Ghostwire Tokyo could have been, rather than look back fondly on the game that it is. Ghostwire Tokyo on PC is plagued by a very specific and very debilitating technical issue. For some people, myself included, running the game above 1080p resolution results in extreme audio desyncing in cutscenes like this. Running at 4K or even 1440p was impossible for me then. I had to play the game at 1080p, which to be honest is fine, but I don't like this resolution anymore. It looks very last gen, and given how beautiful Shibuya could have looked for me running at 4K, I felt very shortchanged by this. One of the things that makes these environments look as good as they do is ray tracing. So much of the game is set against the backdrop of neon signage with rain puddles so thick and wide that they create a mirror beneath your feet, as though two Shibuyas exist at once and you walk on the fault line dividing them. Given how much reflective surface there is here, this ray tracing implementation is very intensive and demanding on your system. On my 2080 Ti PC, for example, ray tracing will tank the frame rate well below 60 FPS, But luckily, Nvidia DLSS is there, and with that set to balanced, I was able to maintain a relatively steady 60 FPS, a little lower depending on the on-screen action. Once this was all set up properly, I had a really smooth experience except for a few minor quest-related bugs which were solved by restarting the game. The biggest overall issue I have, and it's a really big problem, is how bad these rain effects are. Now, I'm going to talk more about how beautiful Ghostwire's rendition of Tokyo is, but so much of that beauty is obscured by this horrendous rain effect. These droplets do not look realistic, and they are so thick and so distracting. They look like that rain from the GTA Trilogy remaster. Not quite as bad as that, but in the same ballpark. I had thought that this might have been a DLSS issue, since that feature can sometimes produce this sort of graininess on fine particles, but turning off DLSS made no difference. This is how it looks all the time, and I came to really hate when it would start to rain, because rather than adding atmosphere and immersion, this weather effect reminds you that you're playing a very uneven video game. One thing that everyone can agree on is that Shibuya and the other locales that have been condensed into Ghostwire's rendition of Tokyo are absolutely stunning. This is one of the most beautiful cityscapes in any video game, full stop. It's also empty, static, and unsatisfying, so much so that I found myself deeply frustrated by all of its wasted potential. Ghostwire's version of Tokyo is so dense with visual detail. Signage, shop fronts, residential blocks, push bikes hidden away in alcoves, traffic cones, the clothing left behind by vanished citizens. I mean, just look at this footage. Every single inch of this world is so full of things that look so interesting and so real that you just want to reach out and touch them. So it really sucks that when you do that, you find you can't interact with anything. You can't open doors, break windows, pick up traffic cones or signs. You can't shoot out a neon sign. You can't go up a staircase, even though it's right there in front of you, because an invisible wall will bar your path. I would not expect a fully interactive, fully destructible Tokyo, because that's like another 2 years or more added to the development timeline for this game. I also wouldn't even expect the sort of interactivity that exists in, say, Yakuza's Kamurocho, since that is a series that has slowly built up to the level of interactivity that we experience today. But I would have hoped for something more than this. This is so static, so unmoving, and so cordoned off that even though it looks so real, it feels so unreal. That was an interesting feeling to contend with, and it was quite unexpected. Ghostwire made me realize that as the graphical fidelity of worlds improves, it creates an implicit need for the interactivity of those worlds to keep pace. I never felt the need to reach out and touch things in Persona's Shibuya, because the graphical style didn't create that urge in me, but I really wanted Ghostwire's Shibuya to respond to at least something I did, because it looks like it should, and the fact that it doesn't constantly shattered the immersion that I would often slip into as I took in all these incredible sights. The skin-deep nature of Ghostwire's Tokyo isn't just about interactivity, however, it's also about the disposability of this world and how little connection we form to it. Good open-world game design isn't about scale, it's about intimacy and familiarity. Having smaller spaces filled with landmarks that you return to is infinitely more powerful than having endless square miles of space that the player visits once and never returns to. That's why I can't remember any of the specific areas in modern Assassin's Creed games, but I can remember almost every inch of Nier Automata's far smaller and far less detailed world. A more direct comparison can be found in Persona 5 and Yakuza games, that each provide a very small section of Japanese cities, but they're dense. And even if they weren't, the fact that you walk up and down these streets repeatedly, learn their layouts and landmarks, you really come to know these places and you develop a relationship to them. They become almost like characters in the story. Ghostwire's Tokyo engenders no such familiarity. It's an open world game, but it's also quite linear in the way that it opens that world up to you. The main storyline will push you from section to section of the city, and it continues to push you ever forward. You rarely come back to somewhere you've been. As a result, you don't really form a connection to any part of this world. You'll encounter a new district with some different architectural makeup, but then, just as soon as you encounter it, you're pushed out of it and into the next district. That's what I mean about disposability. Tango Works artists and level designers would have slaved to have made spaces that look this good, but you engage them once and that's it. I mean, Shibuya Crossing, like, look at this shit. You go here once and you never come back unless you are clearing map markers, and that is such a waste. Finally, I would say that Ghostwire's Tokyo fails in the most critical imperative of any open world. engendering curiosity and exploration. There's simply no point to exploring this world. There's nothing interesting to find, no quest that isn't marked on your map, no NPC who might deliver you an unforgettable quest line, no item worth pursuing, no currencies worth your time. There is no intrinsic or extrinsic motivation to explore this world unless you, for some reason, get a kick out of hoovering up thousands upon thousands of spirit remains just floating around like ghostly detritus. If I were to make a comparison between Ghostwire Tokyo and the Tokyo of any other game, it'd be the Tokyo of Midnight Club. Dark, slick, perfect to cruise through, beautiful, but a beauty only meant to be enjoyed from afar and at speed. Stop the car, get out and try and touch something and the illusion shatters. Go off the main track and there's just nothing there. This really bums me out because this world just looks so fucking cool. I love it. I think it's basically the coolest rendition of Japan I've ever seen, and I just wish that Tango Works figured out a way to use all of this better. Separate from the aesthetic and functionality of Ghostwire Tokyo's world are the side quests, the collectibles, the map markers, all the stuff we refer to in shorthand as open world design. As I mentioned in my intro, there's two games here. One is an interesting occult thriller with linear curated mission design. That's about 20% of the game, tops. The other 80% is this, a giant mess of map markers all denoting really repetitive, phoned-in activities, all of them feeding a variety of useless, broken progression economies, like money that you can't use to buy anything useful, and perk points that don't make any appreciable difference to your gameplay. In the later parts of the last console generation, we all started to get pretty tired of this stuff, and I think game makers knew that, and so rather than build their games around these open-world activities like classic Far Cry games used to, these activities became more optional content that you could largely ignore if you chose to, like Horizon Forbidden West for example. Ghostwire Tokyo's open world design feels very early last gen, in that it's much closer to the classic Far Cry games than it is anything else. A disproportionate number of main missions involve clearing out Torii gates, which are shrines that erect a dense, impenetrable surrounding fog. Kill some enemies at the Torii gate, cleanse it, and you can then access a new area of the map to progress the main storyline. That's a loop that gets old really fast because you've done it in dozens of other games before, and there's never any clever trick to it here. Like Horizon Forbidden West, for example, had these tall-neck dinosaurs, which acted as radio towers, and bringing them online would reveal sections of the map. But no two tall-neck challenges were the same. In fact, they were so different that I was constantly blown away by Guerrilla Games' inventiveness. Here in Ghostwire, once you've cleared one Torii gate, you've seen how it's done, and then you just need to do it like 20 more times. It's a repetitiveness that's mirrored in every other aspect of the open world design. The most common thing you'll find in the open world are these floating spirits which you hoover up and then cash them in at a payphone for experience points. There's like 260,000 of these spirits to hoover up. You do get a few hundred of them each time you hoover them, but that still means there's like, I don't know, 400 of these things on the map. And some of them, you have to do this annoying hand signal thing to unlock them. Pretty cool the first time you do it, really, really not cool the 60th time you're doing it. When I encounter stuff like this, I always wish I could sit down with the developer and be like, okay, what was the goal here when you arrived at 400 as your agreed number for spirits that people need to hoover up? Why is 200 not enough? How does your game become better when you do this? Like, I legit would love to have that conversation because this is just so obviously overkill that I would love to understand the logic that gets us to this point. Outside of this, there are dozens of little shrines to find which increase your ammo on your finger guns, and some prayer bead things which increase various aspects of your combat, stealth, or exploration toolkit. You don't need any of this stuff because combat is so easy that you can get by fine without it. There are little collectible items that you can sell for money you don't need. There are cosmetics to be found, but it's a single player game where you play in first person, so you can't even see the collectibles you unlock unless it's in cutscenes. All of these things are the extrinsic motivators I mentioned, but none of them are at all appealing, so you don't feel any desire to push out into this open world to chase them. The most notable aspect of the open world design are the side quests, and these mirror the tension inherent in Ghostwire Tokyo. Fantastic style, very little substance. Most often they're brief stories that draw from Japanese folklore, invoking the names of demons and spirits that you might be familiar with if you have any knowledge of Japanese myth or legend. I only know some of them because I've seen them in other video games, that's the truth, but it's still cool nonetheless. It's window dressing that mirrors that of the Witcher's side quests, which invoke things like trolls and werewolves and witches and all that stuff, putting you into close contact with the boogeymen from Western fairy tales. In Ghostwire, that connection to this world is nice, but it can only go so far to mask how repetitive almost every single side quest is. A faceless spirit with a disembodied voice will tell you that they can't pass on until you find or kill something for them. You'll find or kill that thing, usually in a building no more than a few dozen meters away. You get some XP, and that's it. The best side quest I did was one where I had to give a ghost some toilet paper, and that was only interesting because it reminded me of that Seinfeld episode.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is kind of embarrassing, but there's no toilet paper over here.
I'm aware that there's a type of player who takes a lot of pleasure from the satisfaction of clearing out a map and ticking off a list of completionist tasks as you work towards a platinum trophy. I actually think Ghostwire Tokyo is a pretty good game for someone like that, because at no point is any of this stuff annoying or laborious or drawn out. All of the tasks set for you can be completed very quickly. You'll rarely get bogged down doing one thing, which means that if you are that sort of completionist style player, you'll move through this at a nice cadence, and in about 35 hours of play, you'll have an easy platinum under your belt. But I'm not that kind of player at all. I don't play games to kill time. I play games to feel something. But no part of this open world design made me feel anything. And feeling nothing is just about the worst thing that you can feel in a video game, I think. Ghostwire Tokyo tells the story of Akito, a man who died when a supernatural force attacked Tokyo, but unlike everyone else, his corpse wasn't whisked away into the ether. KK, the ghost of a grisly demon hunter, sees Akito's corpse and, having no other options, reanimates it so that he can use it to seek his vengeance. Akito's still in there though, and what begins as a tense relationship of split personalities soon blossoms into a bromance as each of them share more about the tragic events that led them there and what they're fighting for. I would say that story is not a reason to play Ghostwire Tokyo. For example, one of the game's 6 chapters is devoted to getting demonic motorcycle oil so that you can ride the demonic motorcycle through the demonic fog. This is not exactly a game that's serving up a dense, thought-provoking narrative, though it does have its moments. In particular, the coming together of Akito and KK is nice. KK is cranky and jaded, he's seen it all and he's had jack of it. Akito is flipping the fuck out because an hour ago he didn't even believe that ghosts existed, and now he's got one living in his right hand, and you just don't want anything living there. That's a very important hand for a variety of reasons. That's the hand you use to hold your Wiimote. Anyway, point is, there's some nice interplay between these two. It's a good, likable combo that works. It's just that their grand quest and the villain they're squaring off against are very one-dimensional. A masked antagonist with a threadbare backstory, a typical maniacal plan you've seen a few dozen times before. The main quest is little more interesting than the side quest, to be honest. It's just some light window dressing to shuttle you through the missions and to punctuate it with a few awkward boss encounters. I've been really critical of this game to this point, but I mentioned earlier that 20% of the game is this tense, curated, structured thriller, and that part of it I really liked. Both in terms of style and gameplay, it sits at this really unique spot between survival horror and action, because this is definitely not a survival horror game. And one thing I would say about this game is that it's not scary. It's creepy, it's eerie, it's tense, but it's never scary. I'm someone that actually struggles with survival horror games a little. Like, I play the big stuff like Resident Evil or whatever because they're pretty safe, but I steer clear of a lot of the AA horror stuff because that shit can get really fucked up and I don't have much stomach for that. But Ghostwire is not remotely close to that territory, which is interesting in and of itself because it kind of looks like it would be, with its creepy spirits and headless school children and giant behatted women running around with giant scissors. And yet it never feels scary because you're actually way more powerful than your enemies. That's the main trick with survival horror games, right? Your fragility, your lack of resources, the strength of your foes. Survival horror games make you feel a sense of dread because you're typically so weak and so exposed that you're almost always just half a step away from your own mortality. Ghostwire is not like that. You are not fragile, you have essentially endless resources, and your foes do not pose any threat at all. You're also just shooting your finger guns and pointing aggressively at everything in sight, ripping out exposed cores with cool animations that will drain your controller battery faster than any other game has managed to. So the whole thing plays like an action game, but it has all the aesthetic hallmarks of a horror experience, and that tension between those two styles, that's unique. And it would be cool if more games could explore that space because I think Tango Works have really landed on something here, even though they didn't execute it quite right. Because as much as I appreciate that tension between horror and action, the action side of things really lets the whole package down. The finger-pointing combat is very, very bad. It's just so mindless, so spammy. The only strategy you'll ever need to employ is walk backwards, pull right trigger. I'm not shitting you, that is literally all there is to it. You deal fire, wind, and water damage, but none of those apply any status effects. You can't weave them together for bonus damage or for utility or CC or buffs or nothing. It's just mindless pew pew, and within the first hour of gameplay, you've seen every single aspect of the combat sandbox. Neither your capabilities nor that of your enemies evolves in any way, shape, or form. Much like the open world, repetitiveness is combat's defining characteristic. During a 15 or so hour playthrough, there are a number of occasions where the open world structure is abandoned and you're pushed into these interior spaces. You'll move through these haunting, shifting worlds that feel like such a stark contrast to the faceless urban sprawl that makes up the rest of the game. Within these missions, you'll often be separated from KK, robbing you of almost all your powers and making you far weaker and far more vulnerable. In these moments, this game is excellent. It's still not a survival horror, but its mindless combat has been removed from the equation and you're suddenly forced to actually think about your environment, your enemies, and the limited tools you still have at your disposal. Whenever this happened, I was always thinking to myself, so this is what Ghostwire could have been. It's a view into the game we might have had if Tango Works were willing to solve the obvious problems inherent in Ghostwire's core combat loop, mission design, and open world structure. That would have been a very different product, something far closer to what Tango Works are used to making. So I understand why they didn't go in that direction, because they specifically said they wanted to operate outside their traditional wheelhouse. But the Ghostwire Tokyo experiment was not a success, and I think these brief sections where the game does work really underscore just how far short the rest of the package falls. So, pretty rough review, sure, but I want to circle back on a few of the positives I've mentioned during this review because I don't think this is like irredeemable garbage or whatever. I think it's got some really cool stuff in it, and I'm sure that for some people, that stuff is going to be enough to make this a worthwhile experience for them, especially at different price points, and especially when this thing eventually hits Game Pass. Ghostwire Tokyo's Tokyo is stunning. I definitely feel like people should at least see this, especially if you're someone who's been to Tokyo as I have. It's just cool to see this place rendered in the way that Tango Works have done it. It's skin-deep beauty, but it's beauty nonetheless, and it's nice to take it in. Similarly, if you're a Japanophile with an interest in Japanese myth, legend, and folklore, I think you're really going to get a kick out of this. When Nakamura first conceived of Ghostwire Tokyo, it came from her interest in folklore and urban legend. That is the rock on which the Ghostwire Church is built, and through side quests, bestiary, and collectibles, I think it really delivers on this front. If you're the kind of person that loves a collectathon, then Ghostwire Tokyo is going to be a very pleasant experience for you because it gives you a lot of boxes to tick, but none of them are arduous or frustrating. When the narrative is done, there's still a good 20 hours of stuff to do and collect. So yeah, you can just put on a podcast or an audiobook and settle into a groove with this one. Finally, and this is where I come in as a consumer, there's a type of person who's just interested in the meta-narrative of video games, like who's making what, how does it compare to what they've made before, how are genres advancing or regressing, where does this game fit into the broader video games industry. On that front, Ghostwire Tokyo is a really fascinating title because it comes from emerging talent. It's a studio trying to avoid being pigeonholed into one genre. It's pushing certain technological frontiers while completely abandoning others. It's leaning into what makes Japanese games so interesting and so cool, and it's marrying that with what makes one genre of Western games so boring and so shit. It seesaws between elements of survival horror and balls-to-the-wall action in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before. Seeing all of that, experiencing it for myself, that interests me as someone who's really invested in this hobby, and that's why I'm ultimately glad that I played Ghostwire Tokyo. But is it good? I don't think so, and that's why I don't recommend it. So I'm not sure if you've heard this or not, but GPU prices are coming down. There was a big supply challenge for a long time, but that's significantly improved, meaning that there's literally never been a better time to upgrade to a 30 series GPU. Why would you want to do that? Well, a lot of reasons actually. Nvidia's range of 30 series GPUs do bring more raw processing power than any other GPU on the market. So if you want to be able to crank your settings, then a 30 series card is a very good start. Nvidia's RTX series cards also enable ray tracing, which is the most significant graphical leap of this current generation. Ray tracing simulates light using an algorithm, resulting in the most realistic rendition of light we've ever seen in video games. Many of the biggest games from the last few months support ray tracing. I'm talking Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm talking Dying Light 2, and of course, Ghostwire Tokyo. One of the reasons why ray tracing is becoming more and more popular recently is because of something called NVIDIA DLSS, which stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling. This is another feature that Ghostwire Tokyo supports, and what this does is it renders your game at a lower resolution, and then it uses AI to upscale the image so that it looks like it's running at a much higher resolution. This gives your GPU more headroom to run at higher resolutions, higher frame rates, and enable more graphical options like ray tracing. Recently, when I tested DLSS on Guardians of the Galaxy, I got nearly 50% more frames from it when I had ray tracing enabled, which is obviously a huge increase. If you're keen to tap into what NVIDIA 30 series GPUs are capable of, then can I suggest the MSI range? I've been using MSI stuff for years, monitors, laptops, motherboards, and now GPU, since MSI sent me their brand new RTX 3090 Ti, which obviously is a very high-end card, sure, but this is what I do for a living, and I need a card that lets me absolutely crank every graphical setting to its max, reliably capture gameplay footage, and edit in 4K when Austin is unavailable, and this card lets me do all that. The MSI GeForce RTX 3090 Ti Gaming Trio X offers top-of-the-line performance with a staggering 24GB of GS6 memory, so you can enjoy fully unlocked performance backed with award-winning MSI engineering and cooling that's nearly silent when gaming. Ray tracing, NVIDIA DLSS, NVIDIA Reflex, and so much more is all possible with a card like this, and all of that is going to be running at its absolute maximum potential. While you're at it, if you're investing in a 30 series GPU, you may also want to think about your storage as well, since you don't want that bottlenecking your experience. The all-new Spatium series SSDs from MSI are built with their PCIe Gen 4 technology, capable of reaching an incredible 7,000 megabytes per second read and 6,800 megabytes per second write speed. And they support storage of up to 4 terabytes. This is the storage that I use in my PC, and yeah, it's awesome. Plus, it comes with a 5-year warranty, which really matters when it comes to storage. With thousands of awards from media and critics and over 20 years of expertise, there's a reason why more gamers choose MSI for GeForce RTX 30 series GPUs and ultra-fast storage. See the links in the description below to learn more. Thanks NVIDIA and MSI for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.